Your guitar heroes are not more talented than you. They just approach things differently. And once I figured this out, my own playing skyrocketed. I used to suck. And I thought that I would never have what it takes to play like my favorite guitar players. But I found out that they were all doing something very different than what I was doing in my practice. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. There are 5 things that I found that they all did to become guitar heroes. I actually started figuring this stuff out when I started interviewing some of my favorite guitar players, even some of my own guitar heroes. I've interviewed people like John Petrucci, Andy Wood, Baxty, and Jake Workman, just to name a few. I've also obsessively studied interviews and lessons with some of my guitar heroes, probably the same guitar heroes that you have. And I found out that they all approach mastery in a very similar way. The first thing they have in common. Anyone who knows about Eddie Van Halen knows that he always had a guitar in his hand. His days were filled with only 2 things and 2 things only. Either practicing his guitar or tinkering around on his guitar and messing around with pickups and electronics and making things up and inventing stuff. Well, I guess there was a third thing, and that was doing drugs. But that's besides the point. The point is, he was obsessed with the guitar. And that's the first thing your guitar heroes have in common. They are obsessed. But hold on, don't fall into the trap that I did. I used to have lots of days, and still do, where I don't even want to touch the guitar. And some days, it feels like I don't love the guitar like I used to. And then I tell myself, well, that must mean that I don't have it in my bones, that I don't love guitar like my guitar heroes love guitar, that I'm not obsessed enough. Or maybe it's a sign that, this is not for me. And then to make matters worse, sometimes I'll hear really good guitarists say things like, you just have to love it, man. Like, practice isn't practice. If it feels like practice for you, then you don't really love it. That's such bullshit. This is terrible advice because I've also spoken to other really good guitar players, including my guitar heroes, and they actually say that a lot of days they don't want to touch the guitar either. So my whole point is that obsession is fueled by progress. You think these guitar heroes of yours would have continued being obsessed if they saw 0 progress? No, you can actually cultivate and grow obsession similar to like what Eddie Van Halen had by simply committing to progress. So how did they actually progress? Which brings me to my next point, the next thing that they all have in common. They were obsessed with problem solving. Getting good is a game to them. It's the funnest thing in the world to problem solve and figure out how can I get better at my playing. They all had guitar heroes too, and they obsessively problem solved and figured out how to play what their guitar heroes were playing. They would put on vinyls and put it on slow and rewind it and figure out what their guitar heroes were doing. This process of problem solving was addicting and was extremely stimulating to them. So the question is what does this problem solving process look like to them? This is probably the most important piece, and this is the third thing that they all have in common. I'll tell you right now that their problem solving process is a lot different than how my problem solving process was when I used to practice. I really used to think that if I simply practiced enough hours and did enough repetitions over and over again, that would be enough. If I wasn't making progress, I would chalk it up to, well, I just haven't put in enough repetitions, I haven't put in enough hours. Well, unfortunately, 10,000 hours later, I still couldn't play like some of my guitar heroes. But after studying and interviewing all these guys, I realized that they approach problem solving much differently than just simply putting in the repetitions. They all did something that I now call regressions. A regression is when you break down a technique or a problem to its simplest form and master it in its simplest form first. Then from there, you progressively build up to be able to execute the technique in its fullest form. So an example of a regression in alternate picking, for example, would be this. And by the way, this is something that John Petrucci specifically talked about. Number one, you notice that your alternate picking falls apart at higher speeds. So you break it down even further and you realize that it's your picking hand that's the problem, that's running into strings and fumbling over strings. You then break it down even further and you realize more specifically that it's inside the string picking. Your pick is getting caught on the strings when you're trapped inside the strings in a progression. Number four, you work on an exercise that specifically targets inside the string picking. Number five, you break it down even further and you do that same exercise but with a right hand only, right hand isolation inside the string picking. Now if you reverse these steps, you would get the exact process of doing a regression. You work on inside the string picking with an isolated right hand, no left hand involved. Then you bring in the left hand with the exercise and you work on the inside the string picking exercise with the left hand. Once that problem area starts to smooth out, you start working on your speed until you can finally get to that full level of inside the string picking that you wanted. And that's how a regression works. Almost every Guitar Hero that I talked to did right hand isolation exercises to target their picking, specifically their alternate picking weaknesses. It is very common for these guys to be able to reverse engineer techniques and have the awareness to know what to work on and what to solve. Okay, so now that we know that every Guitar Hero obsessively works on their weaknesses and does regressions in order to get better at their weaknesses, the question is what about their natural strengths? Where does that come into play? And that brings us into the next thing that they all have in common. When you think of Eddie Van Halen, what do you think of? Probably his otherworldly tapping technique or his whammy bar sounds. Or what do you think of when you think of Jimi Hendrix? Probably his unique way of using double stops to really fill out a melody. Or what do you think of when you think of John Petrucci? Probably his unreal speed and attack, specifically with alternate picking. The point is that most of these guitar heroes have their own thing that they do better than anyone else. And I found out that most times this was simply born out of their natural instinct to capitalize on their strengths. And that's the beauty of it. These players were more concerned with creating their own unique sound by capitalizing on their strengths than they were, concerned with sounding like someone else. Sure, at the beginning, you have to imitate your favorite players and copy them and figure out the techniques. But from there, if you really want to stand out, you have to start capitalizing on your strengths to develop your own unique sound. Now, if you're anything like I was, you've tried and tried but failed to play like your guitar heroes. And it's not your fault. Most stuff out there doesn't teach how to approach practicing, how to approach doing regressions for specific skills. So if you need a specific detailed practice system, watch this video right here.